It was 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in November 1957, and Miles Davis had just finished a recording session that would eventually become part of one of the most important jazz albums ever made. He was exhausted, creatively drained, and all he wanted was to go home to his apartment on the Upper West Side. What happened during the cab ride that never happened would change someone's life 20 years later. Miles stood on the corner of 52nd Street in Midtown Manhattan, his trumpet case in one hand, the other raised to hail a cab. The street was mostly empty, just a few stragglers leaving clubs, some workers heading home. The temperature had dropped to near freezing. The first cab passed him completely. Didn't even slow down. Maybe the driver didn't see him, Miles thought, though the streetlight was directly overhead, and Miles was wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The second cab slowed down slightly. The driver made eye contact with Miles, then accelerated and kept going. The third cab did the same thing. By the fourth cab, Miles understood. He'd been in New York long enough to know what was happening. It didn't matter that he was well-dressed, that he was carrying an expensive instrument, that he had money in his wallet. What mattered was what the drivers saw when they looked at his face. Miles kept his hand up. He'd wait all night if he had to. He was tired, but he'd learned patience from a lifetime of having to be patient in situations that shouldn't require patience. The fifth cab pulled over. The driver was a white man, probably in his late 40s, with thinning hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lot of years driving cabs through New York winters. He looked at Miles through the passenger window with an expression that wasn't hostile, exactly, but wasn't welcoming either. Miles opened the rear door and slid in, bringing his trumpet case with him. Upper West Side, he said. Giving the address, 72nd and Amsterdam. The driver adjusted his rearview mirror, not to see the road better, but to see Miles better. There was a long pause. Miles could feel what was coming before the driver even opened his mouth. "You got money?" the driver asked. Miles pulled out his wallet, thick with bills from the advance he'd gotten for the recording session. "I've got money." Another pause. The driver was doing mental calculations, weighing something. Miles had seen this expression before. Mana's the face of someone trying to talk themselves into or out of something that went against what they'd been taught. "Look," the driver finally said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. I don't go to Harlem. It's late. I got a policy." "I'm not going to Harlem," Miles said calmly. "Upper West Side. I just told you." "Yeah. But..." The driver trailed off, still looking at Miles in the rearview mirror. "Look, I can't. I'm sorry. I just can't drive you." Miles had a choice in that moment. He'd had this choice hundreds of times before, in different situations, with different people. He could get angry. And God knows, he had every right to be angry. He could make a scene, shame this driver, report him. He could do what a lot of people did when faced with this kind of casual conversational racism, fight it directly. Instead, Miles did something that surprised even himself. "I understand," Miles said quietly. He opened the door to get out, but before he did, he reached into his wallet and pulled out an envelope he'd been carrying. It had $500 in it. Mystic cash he'd been planning to deposit at the bank the next day. Money from a gig, money he'd earned, playing his horn until his lips were numb and his fingers ached. He placed the envelope on the back seat, along with a business card and a pen he borrowed from the door pocket. On the back of the card, he wrote something quickly, put the pen back, and got out of the cab. "Wait," the driver said, confused. "You forgot." But Miles was already walking away, trumpet case in hand, looking for another cab, or maybe he'd just walk. It was cold, but it was only 40 blocks. He'd walked further for less important reasons. The driver sat there for a moment, staring at the envelope on his back seat. He picked it up, felt the thickness of it, opened it. $500 in 1957. That was more money than most cab drivers made in a month. It was rent for 3 months. It was groceries for half a year. It was the kind of money you saved up for, planned for, needed desperately, and never seemed to have enough of. The driver's hands were shaking as he pulled out the business card. On the back, in neat handwriting, it said, "This would have been your tip for treating me like a human being. Instead, take it and think about what being afraid costs you. Next time someone who looks like me gets in your cab, try seeing a person instead of a color. Maybe you'll make more than just the fare. Miles Davis." The driver read it once. Then again, then a third time. He looked up to see if he could still see the man who'd written it, but Miles was gone, already halfway down the block, a small figure in an expensive coat, disappearing into the New York night. For a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20, the driver just sat there with that envelope in his hands, and that note staring up at him. Cars passed. Other potential fares walked by, looking for cabs. He didn't see any of it. What he saw for the first time, really, was himself. Not the version he told himself he was, Myers, a good guy, not really racist, just practical, just following unwritten rules that everyone followed, but the actual person he'd become without noticing. Someone who saw a well-dressed man with money and an instrument and refused to drive him 12 blocks because of fear he couldn't even name, and it had cost him, not just the tip Miles mentioned, but something bigger. It had cost him the chance to be decent, to be the person he probably thought he was when he looked in the mirror in the morning. The driver, whose name was Robert Murphy, drove home that night without picking up another fare. He couldn't. He was crying too hard to drive safely, and he didn't trust himself to interact with another human being until he'd figured some things out. At home, his wife asked what was wrong. He showed her the money and the note. She read it silently, then looked at her husband with an expression he'd never seen before. Not quite disappointment. Not quite pity. Something sadder than both. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," Robert said. "But I can't keep the money. That wouldn't be right." "Then what?" Robert thought about it for a long time. "I'm going to try to be the person he thought I could be when he wrote this." The next night, Robert went back to work, and when he saw a young black man hailing a cab on 125th Street, Robert pulled over. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding. Every instinct trained into him over 47 years of life told him not to do this. He did it anyway. "Where to?" Robert asked. The young man gave an address in Brooklyn. Robert nodded and started driving. The whole ride, he kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting, he wasn't sure what. Trouble? Danger? Some confirmation of all those fears he'd been taught to have? What he saw was just a tired kid, maybe 21, heading home from a night shift at a hospital where he worked as an orderly. They talked a little. The kid was saving money for medical school, wanted to be a doctor. Had a daughter at home, 2 years old. When they arrived at the address, Robert only charged half the fare. "Why?" the young man asked, confused. "Because someone once paid me a whole lot more than cab fare to learn a lesson," Robert said, "and I'm still paying it forward." Over the next 20 years, Robert Murphy became something of a legend among New York cabbies, the guy who'd pick up anyone, anywhere, anytime, who talked to every passenger like they were human beings, with stories worth hearing. He kept the note in his wallet every single day for 20 years. The paper got soft and worn. The ink faded, but Robert kept it there, right behind his driver's license. In 1977, Robert Murphy died of a heart attack at 67 while driving his cab. His daughter Catherine was 26. She'd grown up hearing the story about the note and the $500. After the funeral, she found the note exactly where she knew it would be, behind his driver's license, soft as cloth from 2 decades of being handled. Catherine had just graduated from Columbia Law School and passed the bar. She was about to start work at a civil rights law firm in Manhattan. Her father had supported her through law school with extra shifts and delayed retirement. He'd said she was being the person someone once paid him $500 to help her become. Catherine held that note in her hands and realized she'd never thanked the person who wrote it. Her father had tried to find Miles Davis over the years, but had never managed to actually meet him. And now her father was gone, and the man who'd changed his life would never know what had happened. Unless Catherine told him. It took her 3 weeks of calls, letters, and favors from people who knew people, but Catherine finally got a number for Miles's manager. She explained who she was, what she wanted to say, and asked if there was any way she could meet Miles in person. 2 months later, Catherine got a call. Miles was playing at a club in Greenwich Village. If she wanted to come by after the show, he'd meet with her. Catherine brought the note in a clear plastic envelope she'd bought to preserve it. She brought photos of her father. She brought her law degree, newly framed. She wanted Miles to see what his $500 had become. After the show, Catherine went backstage. Miles was sitting in a chair, a towel around his neck, looking tired but satisfied. Someone pointed Catherine out. Miles looked at her with those intense eyes. "You're the cab driver's daughter." Catherine nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Then my father kept your note in his wallet for 20 years, until the day he died. He read it almost every day." She handed Miles the plastic envelope. He took it, held it up to the light, read his own words, written 2 decades earlier on the back of a business card. "I don't remember writing this," Miles said quietly, "but I remember the night. I remember being tired and cold and so sick of having to convince people I was human." He looked up at Catherine. Did it change him, or did he just feel guilty? "It changed him," Catherine said. "He became the person you hoped he could be. He drove everyone, everywhere. He said you gave him $500 to stop being afraid, and it was the best money anyone ever spent on him." She showed Miles the photos of her father, then her law degree. "He put me through law school," Catherine said. "Worked extra shifts, drove extra hours. Said he wanted me to spend my life defending the people he'd spent too many years being afraid of. I start work at a civil rights law firm next month." Miles was quiet for a long time, looking at the photos, the degree, the worn note. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "I wrote that note because I was too tired to be angry," he said. "Because fighting the same fight every single day gets exhausting, and sometimes you just want to plant a seed and hope something grows. But you never know. You never get to see if the seed took root." He handed everything back to Catherine, except the note that he kept, looking at it like he was trying to remember the person he'd been when he wrote it. "Thank you for showing me it did," Miles said. "For showing me that sometimes, when you're too tired to fight, grace works better than anger." Catherine cried then. "He would have wanted you to know," she said when she could speak again, "that the $500 bought more than a lesson. It bought a different life. For him. For me. For probably hundreds of people he drove over 20 years who might not have gotten that ride otherwise. And now for every person I'm going to represent in court. Miles stood up and hugged her. Not a brief hug, not a polite hug, but a real one. The kind you give someone who's brought you unexpected news that your tired, cynical heart needed to hear. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "Be better than your father was before he met me. Be the person we all should be, but keep forgetting to be." Catherine kept the note. It's in a frame in her office now, nigh a civil rights law firm she founded in 1985, that's still operating today. Under the note, there's a plaque that says, "What being afraid costs you." Miles Davis, 1957. She's told the story hundreds of times, to clients who are afraid to fight back, to young lawyers who wonder if one case, one person, one moment can really make a difference, to her own children, who grew up hearing about their grandfather, the cabbie, and the jazz musician who paid him $500 to be brave. The $500, by the way, Robert never spent. He put it in a bank account for Catherine's education, with 20 years of interest. It helped pay for her first year of law school. So in a very literal sense, Miles Davis's $500 became a law degree, which became a civil rights practice, which became justice for hundreds of people who might not have gotten it otherwise. Sometimes change happens in dramatic moments, or protests, marches, legislation. But sometimes it happens in the back of a cab at 2 in the morning, when someone who's too tired to be angry decides to be generous instead. When someone who's made a mistake is given 500 reasons to do better. When grace is extended, not because it's deserved, but because maybe, just maybe, it might grow into something beautiful. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of choosing grace over anger, generosity over vengeance. Drop a comment about a time someone gave you a second chance you didn't deserve, but that changed your life. Ring that notification bell for more stories about the small moments that rippled into big changes.